This is the Gospel reading for the 22nd Sunday after Pentecost. It is from Luke, the 12th chapter, beginning at the 13th verse and continuing through the 21st verse. It is the familiar parable of the rich fool. Now, this is the first in a series of 3 stewardship sermons. This passage in Luke was placed within a larger section of warnings and encouragements by Jesus, when suddenly someone in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." And Jesus replied to this man, "Man, who appointed me a judge or an arbiter between you?" Then he said to them, "Watch out. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions." And he told them this parable. The ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest. And he thought to himself, "What shall I do? I have no place to store my crops." Then he said, "This is what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns and build bigger ones. There I will store my surplus grain. And I'll say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy. Eat, drink, and be merry." But God said to him, "You fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? This is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves, but is not rich toward God." I'd like us to think about this for a minute. We begin with Jesus being confronted by a man who shouts to him from the crowd, wanting more inheritance money from his brother. By what Jesus said, we might think he came to the wrong person, because Jesus said he had no interest in resolving the man's selfish dispute. Jesus saw an important teachable moment about stewardship, however. Watch out for greed. We all can be greedy for many things. We can be greedy for opportunities. We can be greedy for the limelight, greedy for power, greedy for food, greedy for the next promotion. And of course, we can be greedy for money or wealth. As a good wheat farmer, the fool was wealthy in wheat, and he was greedy. In this parable, did you notice that the rich fool is egotistical, very self-centered? His only concern is for himself and his retirement, so he can eat, drink, and be merry. He's blessed as a hard-working farmer with more food than he can handle. In fact, his wealth has actually created a problem for him. "What shall I do?" he says. I know. It comes to him. "I'll tear down my barns. I'll build bigger barns. And there I will store my surplus grain. And I will say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy. Eat, drink, and be merry." Familiar? He lives by his life by the holy trinity of me, myself, and I. He's a fool because he thinks he can secure his future with his wealth, to the exclusion of his being concerned for anyone else. He's a fool because he gives finite things infinite values. The beauty of Jesus' parable is that it points to the essential benefit and even the necessity to be part of a community throughout life. We are created to commune with others and with our Creator, God. Christ gave us the Eucharist as a sacrament in which we share communion with each other and with Christ. The care and nurture of life, the stewardship of life, is the sharing and not the hoarding of who we are and what we own. How might the man in the parable shift his selfish behavior and become rich toward God? I ask you to think about the saints before us who have been rich toward God in their faith. You might think easily of biblical characters like Abraham or Sarah, Moses, any of the prophets. Think of Mary, the mother of Jesus. Think of Joseph. Think of Peter, Paul, any of the other disciples. And think of the people who were martyred in the early church for what they believed, for their precious faith. So that faith could then be shared during the past 2,000 years for our sake. That's the stewardship of faith. I ask you now to think about those you have known in your life. Family, colleagues at work, friends, who would do anything for you and anyone else. Think of the self-giving people within this community of faith here, and others who respond to the generative spirit of God and reject the selfish nature of the rich fool. Think of the person now sitting beside you. These are the saints who give and give and give more of themselves than they knew existed. We may be tired at the end of a day, but we know God will fill our cup for the next day. And when our lives are at an end and God calls us home, we are content. We are at peace to be at home with Christ, our friend and our Redeemer. We are all rich stewards, rich toward God. We're rich when we tend to our faith in God as a gardener tends the plants under her or his care. The stewardship of life is not what we do, but what Christ does through us. This gospel lesson teaches that the rich in faith may have very little in their bank accounts. And it doesn't matter. What does matter is that we are generous with our time, and that's a most precious gift. The rich fool didn't know he'd be called that night by God, nor do we know when God will call for us. We are called to be stewards, caretakers of all God, our Creator, has given, from the trees to the oceans, so that children will know the sovereign God of all nations, who created the universe and all who are in it. Christ's stewardship is to shift the perspective from me to we. The wealthy fool was all about himself. The point is that our being rich toward God is to realize and live our truest selves. We are human beings who have been created to be like Jesus, Christ-like, willing and able to empathize, to feel the pain of others, to reach out and help. Human empathy, caring about our fellow human beings, our enemies, and our friends, is the bedrock of Christ's stewardship. Successful fools, in their greed to maintain the status quo, their privilege, their entitlements, understand none of this. Some say money makes the world go round. Did financial wealth create or set the planets in their orbits? To the glory of God. Amen.